We need to talk about what's going on in the Caribbean right now.
Yeah.
You've probably seen the headlines about this earthquake and the tsunami threat.
Yeah.
But we're going to go deeper than the headlines here.
Absolutely.
And really try to break down what you need to know to stay safe.
Yeah.
We've got reports from NBC News, CNN, and the Weather Network.
Okay.
And it's a serious situation.
It is. Yeah. It's a developing story.
Yeah.
And it's critical to understand the immediate danger, but also the science behind it.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
On February 8th, 2025, at 6:23 p.m. Eastern Time, a powerful earthquake struck in the Western Caribbean.
Right.
It was initially reported as a magnitude 8.0.
Wow.
But the U.S. Geological Survey later reassessed it to a 7.6.
And that adjustment in magnitude is important because it shows how science works in real time. As more data comes in, scientists can refine their understanding of the event.
Yeah.
But even at a 7.6 magnitude, that is incredibly powerful and has the potential to trigger a tsunami.
And that's exactly what has officials worried, right?
Yeah.
The earthquake hit about 130 miles southwest of Georgetown in the Cayman Islands.
Okay.
Now, you might think that's pretty far out.
Right.
But when we're talking about the forces involved in a tsunami, distance doesn't always equal safety.
Exactly. Think of it this way. This earthquake originated 6 miles below the surface of the ocean floor.
Okay.
That's deep enough and with enough force to displace a massive amount of water.
Right.
And that displaced water is what creates the tsunami.
Okay, so we got this massive displacement of water.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Right.
Does it just create like a giant wave?
It's not just one giant wave.
Okay.
That's a common misconception.
Yeah.
The energy from the earthquake actually travels outward through the water. And that energy can travel thousands of miles across the ocean.
So the water itself isn't necessarily moving that far.
Right.
It's the energy that's propagating.
That's a great way to put it. And when that energy reaches shallower coastal waters, it starts to bunch up, forming a series of waves that can surge inland with incredible force.
And that's what we're seeing with the tsunami advisories issued for a large part of the Caribbean.
Right.
We're talking the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Cuba, parts of Mexico, Honduras. The list goes on.
And some of the projected wave heights are truly alarming.
Yeah.
The Weather Network is reporting that Cuba could see waves between 1 and 3 meters above the normal tide level.
3 meters. Can you put that into perspective for our listeners?
Imagine a wall of water.
Wow.
About 10 feet high crashing into the coastline.
Gosh.
That's the kind of destructive power we're talking about.
Yeah.
The Cayman Islands are also at risk with potential waves of 0.3 to 1 meter above tide level.
Okay.
While that might sound smaller,
Right.
it's still enough to cause significant damage and endanger lives.
So what should people do if they're in one of these areas? So if you see that water drawing back dramatically, that's basically nature's giant alarm bell going off.
Yeah, exactly. It might be tempting to go down to the shore and see what's happening.
Yeah.
But that's the absolute worst thing you could do.
Really?
That receding water is like the calm before the storm.
And I imagine that first wave isn't always the biggest one either, right?
You're right, that's another misconception.
Yeah.
A tsunami can come in a series of waves, and sometimes those later waves are even more powerful than the first.
This is all starting to paint a pretty terrifying picture.
Yeah.
Especially for people who are right in the potential path of this tsunami.
It is a serious situation, and that's why the advice given to residents of Puerto Rico, get out of the water now, was so critical. Even though the advisory was later lifted for them, that immediate response could have been life-saving if the situation had escalated.
So if you're in a coastal area and feel a strong earthquake, assume a tsunami is possible and get to higher ground.
Exactly. Don't wait for an official warning or for someone to tell you what to do. Trust your instincts. Yeah.
And get to safety.
And when we say higher ground, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
How far inland do you need to go?
That's a great question. It really depends on the local geography and the severity of the tsunami.
Right.
But as a general rule, you want to get as far away from the coastline as possible.
Okay.
And to an elevation that's well above that projected wave height.
Okay, so let's say you've made it to safety.
Right.
What are some things people should be aware of as they wait for this potential tsunami to pass?
It's important to stay informed and listen to official updates from authorities.
Okay.
Don't rely on rumors or social media for information.
Right.
Also, be prepared for aftershocks.
Oh,
Tsunamis are often followed by a series of smaller earthquakes.
Wow.
Which can cause further damage and disorientation.
This all sounds incredibly intense.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people might assume that tsunamis are just a problem for people who live right on the coast. But from what you're saying,
the impact can be felt much farther inland.
Absolutely. The force of a tsunami can travel miles inland, flooding entire towns and cities.
Wow.
And the water carries debris, trees, cars, even buildings, turning it into this churning, destructive force.
So this is really something that everyone, regardless of where they live, should at least have a basic understanding of.
Yeah.
We've talked about what to do if you're in the immediate path of a tsunami.
Right.
But what about in the bigger picture?
Yeah.
What are some things people can do to be prepared for natural disasters in general?
That's a crucial point. Being prepared isn't just about reacting to a crisis.
Yeah.
It's about anticipating it and taking steps to mitigate the risk.
What are some practical things people can do?
First, have a plan.
Okay.
Talk to your family about what you would do in the event of a natural disaster, earthquake, hurricane, flood, whatever is relevant to your area.
Right.
Know your evacuation routes.
Okay.
Have a go bag with essential supplies. And establish a communication plan in case you're separated.
That sounds like solid advice.
And remember, it's not just about physical preparedness.
Yeah.
It's also about mental preparedness.
Okay.
These events can be incredibly traumatic. So having a support system in place, friends, family, community resources, is essential.
Yeah, it sounds like knowledge is really the best defense when it comes to facing these kinds of events.
It is.
The more you know, the better equipped you are to make smart decisions in a crisis.
Absolutely. And building on that idea of knowledge, let's go back to the specific earthquake in the Caribbean for a moment.
Okay.
It happened at the boundary between the North America and Caribbean tectonic plates.
And that's not just a random location, is it?
Not at all.
Okay.
These tectonic plates are constantly in motion, grinding against each other.
Right.
And that's what causes earthquakes. Yep. And this region has a long history of seismic activity.
How long are we talking?
Well, NBC News reported that there have been 10 earthquakes with a magnitude of 6 or greater.
Wow.
In this region, just in the last century. Wow. And there was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake in 2018 that actually triggered a small tsunami.
So this latest earthquake isn't an isolated incident.
Right.
It's part of a larger pattern of geological activity.
Exactly. And understanding that pattern can help us better assess the risks and be more prepared for future events.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Yeah.
Even if you don't live in the Caribbean.
Right.
What can we take away from this event?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we live on a dynamic planet, and these powerful forces of nature are always at play.
Yeah.
We can't prevent earthquakes or tsunamis.
Right.
But we can learn from them and be better prepared.
And part of being prepared is understanding the science.
Absolutely.
Knowing the warning signs and having a plan in place.
That's right. And it's also about staying informed and heeding the advice of experts and authorities.
Right.
Don't let complacency or misinformation put you at risk.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Now that you know that this region has a history of tsunamis, how does that change your perception of coastal safety, even if you live far from the Caribbean?
Right.
Are you prepared for a similar event in your own region? These are questions worth considering.
And to help you find those answers, I encourage you to check out resources like ready.gov or the National Weather Service website.
Okay.
They have a wealth of information on tsunami preparedness and other natural hazards.
Knowledge is power. Stay safe out there.